Hey everyone, this time we read Galaga by Michael Kimball. This is another one from the Boss Fight book series, and it's a pretty interesting one. It's a little bit quirky, but it's a pretty fun book. So in his book, Michael tells a really interesting story about growing up and playing arcade games and some of the friendships that he made while he was there and some of the other people that he met while he was at the arcades. It's a very interesting story, and I get the impression that arcades and really Galaga in particular helped him through some tough times in his life. There are a few weird things about the book, but they really sort of add to the charm of the book, and they really kind of make me feel a little bit happier when I read them. It's sort of like a bunch of little inside jokes between the reader and the author. Throughout the book, Michael throws in a bunch of pop culture references that involve Galaga. It's really cool to see these, and a lot of them I didn't really know about. He also adds in sort of like this rundown of arcades and pop culture for specific years as he's growing up. The book seems to cover roughly the late 70s and then up through really the mid 80s. And then it jumps a little bit later to a road trip that Michael and I believe his wife had. So there's a really nice story pretty early on in the book where Michael talks about his first trip to an arcade called Aladdin's Castle. Aladdin's Castle was really big in the late 70s and early 80s. So Michael mentions that he came from an abusive household. Specifically, his dad was the one who was abusing him. And he also mentions his brother a little bit. And he really found arcades to be like his safe haven and his safe space. And in fact, he gave us a little story about his dad going in to get him from the arcades, and he kind of felt like his dad had violated his safe haven or gone into his sanctuary. So he would go to a place called Aladdin's Castle whenever his family went to the mall, specifically when his mom and his sister would take him. Aladdin's Castle was a chain arcade, and they were really big in the 70s and 80s. I think there might still be some around, but don't quote me on that. Now, his first time there, he mentions he wanted to play Space Invaders, but the machine was being used at the time, and he didn't really know the etiquette on how to get the next game, and there were just way too many people there to begin with. So instead, he went to one of the other arcade games that apparently had been around there for a while, and nobody was really playing it, and he was kind of hooked from there. Later on in the book, when David's grown up a little bit and he can drive, he mentions he went to another arcade that was in a strip mall. I couldn't find that exact arcade, so we kind of have this little representation of what it might have looked like. This is Galaxian. Specifically, it's the Atari 2600 port, but this was the prequel to Galaga, and David mentions that he played this a lot in the arcades, especially when he first got there. It's sort of a souped-up version of Space Invaders. Namco created it, and it's pretty fun. You basically have the enemies that dive bomb at you, as you can see, and you just try to take them out. These stay in formation much like Space Invaders, but later on with Galaga they would do a lot more. While he does mention Galaxian and Galpus, the majority of the book is on Galaga, as the title would lead you to believe. And it's really interesting to see him use the arcades and everything to build relationships and find friends and everything like that. Or at least that's the idea that I got from reading it. I know he mentioned specifically, I believe it was his best friend Todd at the time. They met outside, but they really kind of strengthened their friendship at the arcade. We get a really nice story of the first time he saw Galaga at the arcades. He saw it as a test cabinet, which is really cool because I had never really heard stories about the test cabinets from somebody who actually played them. Company would put these cabinets in, and they'd usually have like a fake name, or they'd be all black or something like that. So getting to hear a story about someone who actually played one is really cool. It's pretty clear from reading the book that he liked Galaga more than he liked Galaxian. He really enjoyed Galaxian, but Galaga was his game. And just from reading some of his tips and tricks and everything like that, he spent a lot of time trying his best to master this game, whether consciously or subconsciously. I also like that he mentioned how he would set the high scores every day,
because the arcade would basically power the machines down at night so they wouldn't have to pay the bills and they'd get reset. He mentioned something else that I found really fascinating, and that was a little bit of history about the Galaga cabinet. Apparently, Namco didn't make as many as there was for demand, so they took some Bosconian cabinets and they converted them into Galaga cabinets. So you would be able to identify one of these because instead of having, the green label Galaga, it would have a black label Galaga, kind of like what you see here. It reminds me a lot of how Nintendo took old radar scope cabinets and they converted those into Donkey Kong cabinets. That's why you have a few Donkey Kong cabinets that are both red and blue. It's kind of a cool little thing that I didn't know Galaga and Donkey Kong shared in common, and just one of those crazy stories about the arcades that, you don't really hear too much about, but it's really fascinating when you do.
So this was a fairly short book, and it's got kind of an interesting format. Instead of having the chapters and everything like that, he lays it out in really just different stages. And there's about a paragraph or two for each stage, and they run from 1 to 255, referencing Galaga's 255 stages, and then it ends with the kill screen, just like Galaga and a lot of other early arcade games. Anyway, guys, that's going to wrap it up for this episode, so I will see you all later, and if you have any comments, please leave them in the section below.